Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey everyone, it's Adam here. Welcome to the Figure It Out cast for October 2022. I am your host, Adam Koralik, and normally this is where I would be introducing other people. Of course, Abdullah, who gets to pick subjects and is usually on the podcast. Well, there was a bit of a problem, as well as with Rob. So here's the deal. We actually recorded this section of the podcast already, but Rob's microphone did not work properly. In fact, it was recording with the wrong microphone, so his audio is all kinds of scattered, so it essentially was unusable audio. Meanwhile, Abdullah's connection kept dropping in and out, so we were having issues getting a stable connection with him, and ultimately, like, the audio we got out of all this was just not usable. But due to scheduling conflicts, I'm now the only one that was available to fill it in, so sorry. So we'll just kind of end up, I'll mostly truncate what everyone wanted to talk about, and we'll just do it. You'll probably hear references to them in later parts of the video, because I didn't know we wouldn't be able to use this section at the time. Rob will be back on, but Abdullah is unfortunately not going to be in this episode. But thank you to Abdullah, because he picked the subject and he had good thoughts about all this, so I'll do my best to kind of echo it for everybody. So the subject at hand, and if you want to skip around and look at different subjects, all that information is in the description. And as a reminder, this is a Patreon-backed podcast, so if you can support me, I appreciate that. Support the entire channel. You get early access to videos, all the videos, including this one. You can get shout-outs. You can pick subjects. You can even be on the podcast, provided that all those issues don't exist. But yeah, so here we go. So the subject that Abdullah wanted to talk about was the ethics of emulation. And we had a nice discussion, the three of us, and basically Rob's sentiments were mostly echoed by myself as well as Abdullah's. We all kind of basically agreed that you have to look at this from two different perspectives, right? So one is the perspective of the collector. When it comes to emulation, I'm not going to say collectors don't participate in it, but collectors such as ourselves prefer to have the physical, actual item. And I'm not going to say we look down on the concept of emulation, but we don't necessarily partake in it. That would be my situation. Like, I could emulate the Sega Genesis on just about anything, but I don't typically do it. I own a whole bunch of Genesis consoles. I own a bunch of games, etc., and I don't really feel a need to do that. And this would really apply to any console in general. And you know, it's a thing where I basically would not partake in it, not so much because I have any sort of moral objection to it, although there can be legal objections to it. That's a different discussion that we're not really focused on. This was purely on, like, do you find it ethical or not? We all agreed that we found it, like, fine. There are many justified reasons why you might want to emulate a game. Availability of the title, expense of the title, etc. This is not necessarily the same as pirating a title. As in a game just came out and we're not going to pay for it. We're just going to pirate the content. That's a different discussion. That is also illegal. That also is debatably and probably immoral to a certain extent, or unethical would probably be a better term. But we were also basically debating, what is the time frame of that? Like, when does it go from that to it's totally fine and no one cares? Most people would very generally argue that it's like once the developer can no longer make money from it, or enough time has passed that the only people making money off of it are the guys on eBay, although digital kind of changes how that works. But that was the general consensus. But the problem there is that, especially now, a lot of IP rights holders are now re-releasing their content. So even though I've mentioned the Sega Genesis, and I don't think anybody really has an issue with downloading Genesis ROMs, and I don't think Sega really even themselves cared for a long time. Now Sega is making money again off those titles by re-releasing it in the form of the Genesis Classics and stuff like that. So where does that stand? It's kind of an ethical gray area, and that really is the crux of the discussion. And so I can really only, we kind of agreed across the board, but I can really only focus on myself as I'm the one participating here, that I feel like it's really hard to define exactly where that border draws, like where it is, because every single little rule you come up with is going to have certain exceptions. And the only thing you can go at is like with a meat cleaver and basically say like, okay, there's a hard deadline of 10 years. After 10 years, everything is fine. Why? I don't know. It seems kind of arbitrary, or that type of thing where there's just certain rules that make it okay. It's difficult to participate in. So, in general, I would say I personally think it is perfectly ethical based on your circumstances to emulate content, whether that's through software emulation or through hardware emulation. The difference there being software emulation is like, hey, I'm on my PC and I downloaded a Super Nintendo emulator and then I downloaded some ROMs. That's essentially your computer running software that thinks it's hardware. Then that quote unquote hardware is then running different software. It's software running software running software, essentially. Hat on a hat on a hat. Whereas there's hardware emulation, which is something I'm more personally a fan of. Things like ODEs, which stands for Optical Disc Emulator. The word's even in the name. And it's a hardware emulator. So you put that inside of, say, a Sega Saturn. You replace the disk drive with a different piece of hardware. As far as the console knows, it's the same thing, even though it's not. That new device is basically telling the Saturn, like, hey, we're all good over here. Don't worry about it. But that allows you new abilities to be able to play the games not through the discs they originally arrived at, but through like an SD card, and it's just stored with like every single game on it. That way the performance is essentially identical. I personally partake in the latter with some hardware emulation. I never participate in software emulation, not so much because of any ethical issues, but mostly because it just doesn't fit my infrastructure. Like, I never game on PC. I own the vast majority of consoles out there, so I really have no reason to do it that way. But that's more of a me thing. But again, since the subject was the ethics of emulation, I would not look down on anyone who's like, hey man, I really wanted to play like, this really, like, they were talking, like, Abdullah and Rob had been talking about these like expensive Pokemon games, and they're so expensive now that like no kid who ever wants to go back and like look at them and try the history of Pokemon, they can't realistically ever own those, and unless they come from affluent families or if they're willing to really work hard for it, and they shouldn't have to do that. So emulation is just the most viable option. Download some sort of basic emulator, download the ROM, and just try the game and see if you like it and experience it for those stories and that experience that it came with. And that's fine. We wouldn't look down on anybody who wanted to participate that way. And legal issues aside, I think it's perfectly within the realm of being okay to do stuff like that, especially because of the preservation aspect of it, because so many of these games never get any sort of reissue, and that's really the only way to experience them. I keep talking about a lot of the same consoles here, but like the Saturn is a prime example. Something like a Panzer Dragoon Saga, which will never exist again because the source code to it is lost. The only way to play it is either on original hardware or through software emulation, which is in of itself not the best, but it is an option. So I'm on team it's okay to emulate things. Where it gets murky is when it's more recent stuff. And Rob had made a really good point where the Steam Deck has just come out recently, right? And I guess in one of the promo videos, they accidentally showed a tab in the browser that is a Nintendo Switch emulator that can run on the Steam Deck, thus essentially implying you could emulate the Nintendo Switch on the Steam Deck, which at this point in time in 2022, when both platforms are completely relevant and that's Nintendo's primary income source, that's where it gets murky, where that's not necessarily ethical anymore, because now you're just talking straight piracy. But the debate is, what's the difference and where is that hard line cutoff? And that's, as we had discussed in great lengths in the original version of this, it's essentially impossible to draw that down. Like I kept saying, if you had to teach like a Terminator, or something like an AI, if you had to teach it what the difference is, it would be almost impossible, because we can't even really define it for ourselves, much less teach it to something that has no sense of judgment, So it's kind of an interesting discussion that I'm curious of what other people's takes on it would be. But again, it's ultimately, emulation is essentially something that I don't really participate in all that much. But I condone it. I think it's more good than it is bad. And so it's ultimately okay with me. Not that you need my approval or anything, but yeah. So that's pretty much it. The only downside, the only argument I would have against it, I guess I should say, is, and it's pretty rare, because again, Rob was making the point that like, we're super collectors. We like to have the physical editions of everything, and we don't look down on people who don't want to do that. We don't look down on people who want to just emulate stuff and they don't want to have a whole bunch of clutter and they don't want to spend the money, etc., etc. And I agree with that. The only negative, and it's a very niche argument, is I have had discussions in the past with people. Like, for example, I have an entire physical Wii U collection. I don't care if you have a Wii U game. It doesn't matter to me. Like, do whatever you want. But I have had arguments in the past where people are like, well, I have a complete Wii U collection because I burned them all, or not burned, and that's a much older term. I showed my age there a bit, but I downloaded them all and I have them on a flash drive and I run it on a hacked Wii U. It's like, well, you have access to the titles, but you certainly don't own them all. You didn't buy any of them. None of them really exist. You just illegally did that. And I'm not judging you for playing it that way, but we are not on the same level here. And the way Rob likened it, he's like, look, it's like me saying I've got $20 and then you use a printer to print out a fake $20 bill. It's like, yeah, it looks like $20, but one of them has real value intrinsically and the other does not. It's the same basic argument. It's like if I went, not that I would do this because it'd be stupid, but if I went to, GameStop with my Wii U collection, they would offer me some value for it, even though it's GameStop, so they give me like $6. But if I took a flash drive and said, hey, every Wii U game is on here, how much will you give me? They would not give me anything because one is legitimate and one is not. That is the only argument against emulation, but it's a very small audience I've ever seen that thinks that they're the same, that like buying everything and having a set is the exact same thing as having like an illegally attained like pirated set. And it's fine, kind of just do whatever you want, ultimately, as long as you kind of have it within reason, is my take on it. I would not personally necessarily condone pirating stuff that's really, really recent, partially for legal reasons, but also just because, like, you don't necessarily need to screw over the developers and all that who are working hard to make these games for you to have those experiences. But, sometimes you don't necessarily have a choice, and we'll leave it at that. So that was pretty much the subject, and we all kind of echoed all the same thoughts. So I'm sorry that this is a little odd the way this is working, but it just had to be this way. So Abdullah, thank you for the subject and for originally being on when that was possible. And Rob, get a better microphone. Oh wait, you did for the next section. But yeah, before we do that though, I want to give a round of shout outs here. So the following people are all Patreon backers, and they are at the tier in which they get a shout out. We've got Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, Tim Inman, and Trey Wagner. Once again, that is Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, Tim Inman, and Trey Wagner. We appreciate your support. Thank you so much, because Patreon makes this channel function. I'm just going to be completely honest about that. So having early access to videos, getting shout outs, getting to pick subjects, getting to be on the podcast, or if you want to, I appreciate you. Those are things I can offer you. I occasionally give away like game codes over there too, by the way. But I just want to say this to the audience in general, is I really appreciate your support over all these years. I've been doing this for is it like 14 years now? It's been a long time. So I really appreciate the support, and for everybody watching, and I'm going to keep doing this as long as you guys keep allowing me to do it. So thank you very much. Joseph, you actually had no subject this month. So what I thought we would do is we've got a couple of subjects from other Patreon backers who get to pick subjects, and I thought we would just kind of merge this all into just one big section. Sound good to everybody?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we got three of them. One of them is from Chuck Shaw, who we've talked about many times in the past. There's also a guy named Cox, who never got back to me, so I don't know his subject. And then we've got Spencer Puryear, who gave me a subject. So this particular one, we're going to say this is Chuck's subject, but shout out to Cox. Dude, next time... he's a member of my Discord, so we give him guff from time to time. But man, I contacted you multiple times and you never responded to me. But anyway, so this will kind of be yours too, because this is a weird subject and Cox is a very weird person. But anyway, so Chuck wanted to talk about Halloween. Okay, obviously it's October, so we get to do that. He was curious if we've ever dressed up as any game characters, if we remember doing that. And if not, or in addition to that, do you have a favorite series of game characters you like to see every Halloween, or do you have any good stories about something like that?
All right. Well,
I don't really have either of those.
I did actually dress up as just in the generic nobody costume from Kingdom Hearts one year at work for Halloween, just because everyone was doing costumes. It's you know what, I actually have money now, let's actually do something somewhat more. Let's actually do something somewhat. But I only did that once, and generally I don't really care about Halloween all that much.
Right. So here's my background on all this. So, Rob, Joseph, how old are you? You're 34?
34, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we're all basically the same age. So we kind of all grew up around the same time, and as popular as things like Super Mario and Sonic were when we were kids, they didn't really have costumes, to my recollection, just because they were still very 2D, small type of characters. It's only recently that, because they're in 3D and they're more defined now, that you actually get a lot of costumes and artwork for stuff like that. So I was never enough into Halloween to make my own costume. I was always that kid who was we went to Party City or whatever, Spirit Halloween, and that's where you would just make a costume out of pre-existing stuff or whatever. And when we were kids, the big popular ones were Ninja Turtles and the Power Rangers. I remember dressing up as those. I actually never really dressed up as a video game character.
Oh, okay. If we're counting as kids, then yes, I did have a Sonic costume when I was a little kid, and I did dress up as Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat multiple years.
Oh, see, that's perfect. Because yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to know. Because personally, I'm going to be honest, middle school is when I stopped really doing anything with Halloween, and I haven't dressed up as a character since.
Same.
So yeah, so I would only assume we were talking about when we were kids. Although it makes sense, as Halloween is also very much celebrated by adults now. I'm just one that I don't participate for any reason other than I'm lazy. I just don't really care. I don't get anything out of cosplaying for an evening and, doing all that stuff. I can see why that would be fun to people. I just don't personally care.
Yeah, after the first time I did it as an adult, when I actually had money to get, a good costume, and not just, a cheapo thing from, Spirit Halloween or Party City or whatever. It was just okay, this was cool. I'm never doing this again, but it was cool to actually do.
Right, exactly. So the only story I have that I can recall where I would have technically dressed up with anything video game adjacent is the dumbest thing ever. So when I was one of my last Halloweens, one year I dressed up as Cartman, which was kind of perfect. My buddies and I, we were all going to go as the South Park characters. Which kind of made sense. And I was the fat one, so naturally I was going to be Cartman. That made sense. But that Halloween went very roughly, and so I was kind of, the next year around, I was I'm going to hang out with different people when it comes to Halloween, right? And I won't mention him, but I had this friend who, I would just say there was a lot of weird social incidents in his house where, it's you didn't explain something to me, and now we're in a weird situation. That would be an example where we would dress up all right, here's the plan, we'll all get together and we'll do Halloween, and then neglects to tell me that I have other plans, even though we all bought South Park costumes for this reason. That type of friend who makes a plan, and then, you know what I'm talking about, where you have one of those friends who's I'm on board with this, but then they change everything about that situation without discussing it with you.
I've heard of people like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's awful. But anyway, so the year after that, I was in a similar situation. It wasn't Halloween, but it was about to be Halloween. So I'm over at his house just hanging out with him casually. And his parents are just hey, we're all going to this big party tonight. Do you want to go? And I was sure, whatever. Because it's just meant free food and I had nothing better to do. So I'm tagging along, or at least I'm going to tag along. What I don't know is that, we're about ready to go, and they all come out in various costumes. This is a Halloween costume party. I'm just dressed in a t-shirt. My t-shirt yeah, I know, right? My t-shirt happens to be the South Park video game shirt, right after the N64 game came out. So I didn't understand that I was being dragged to a dress-up Halloween costume party as just nothing. And so I kept getting people kept giving me crap for it when I was around, and the only line I could respond with was, my costume is somebody advertising South Park 64. That was all I could think to say.
Oh, God.
And so that's the closest thing I have to some sort of video game character, is I was maintaining that. As for costumes I want to see, I'm going to be honest, I don't really care what other people dress up as. For kind of the same reason. I mean, I don't even partake in it. So, and I don't live in suburbia. So where I live, I get 0 trick-or-treaters every year because I'm in like an apartment building. So nobody comes and bothers me, and I know it's probably the wrong term, but nobody ever comes to my door looking for candy on Halloween, because this is not an area conducive to that possibility. So I never see anybody in costumes, and I don't wander around the streets of Chicago looking for kids that are dressed up. You know what I'm saying? That would be really messed up. I don't tend to see it. I would assume this year you might see a lot more Marios because of the drop of the trailer and all that. I assume that'll be out there. And probably more Sonics, because, they had that movie as well. And I think it's kind of funny that there's a little bit of snarky exchange between those characters on Twitter, which is kind of funny because they both have movies now. But beyond that, no, not really.
Yeah. I never dressed up as a Halloween, the video game character on Halloween when I was a kid. I always picked really weird fucking Halloween costumes. Like, when I was a little kid, I would do like the Ninja Turtle or the fucking, I dressed up like RoboCop one year. But like my mom was always really good at like making cool costumes. So like she made me like the Star Trek uniform from like the Wrath of Khan in like the movies and stuff, like the red one. So I like wore that for a few years. And then I would just dress up as like weird shit, like a German U-boat captain or something like that, because I was a fucking nerd. I still am, but so like I never really did like the video game thing. Like kind of as you said, like back in the day, Adam, like there wasn't that prevalence of video game specific characters. Like you weren't going to go into Party City in 1998 and find like a Cloud Strife Final Fantasy costume, you know.
If it was
I'm
Mario
going back
or
even
Sonic,
earlier.
you probably weren't going to
Yeah.
find it. Or, the Mortal Kombat,
or if
you
it did, it would be like a really shitty, like those fucking plastic masks.
Oh, yeah, no, it was definitely not
like,
a good
that are like the same, material as like a party hat. Like,
yeah.
So, like, that just really wasn't a thing, like, growing up. Like, it is now, and, like, my students and stuff dress up, as video game characters in Halloween. And it's, like, and Adam, like, we have, like, friends like Kelsey Pont, who, like, does, amazing cosplay, especially at game conventions and things like that. And so I do appreciate that. I think that's really where the video game costumes are nowadays. It's like, it's not even really Halloween. It's cosplay at, Comic-Con or PAX or, something like that. Which is...
Yeah, the Kingdom Hearts thing I did was definitely a cosplay meant costume, not Halloween specific.
So I think it's easier like being in a crowd of people that like all kind of share that interest to be able to kind of let your guard down and be able to kind of have fun with a costume that's specifically video game related, especially back in the day. And in terms of like stuff that I'd like to see that I don't see, I would love to see some Mass Effect cosplay, because there's so many like amazing like alien designs and stuff from Mass Effect, but the difficult thing is like they do a really good job in the design of characters to make them not all look human in Mass Effect. So I could see a lot of those costumes being extraordinarily complex to do.
Yeah.
And you would have to be really creative to do like a Krogan costume or a Hanar costume or something like that, So I would love.
You would absolutely need to. If you didn't want to spend a ton of money and a ton of time making it, you'd absolutely need to do one that's just one of the human characters.
Yeah, it'd be like Commander Shepard or an Asari or that's about it. Yeah. But I would love to see it because there are some like amazing creative like cosplay like geniuses out there, and I use that term very deliberately. Like they're incredibly creative in terms of their costume design. Like I bet there would be like some amazing designers that could do some Mass Effect stuff. That would be really cool.
That does actually make me wonder, though, like, how many people who do cosplay, like, specifically cosplay, and not necessarily just, like, occasionally, like, doing a Halloween costume or whatever, actually do stuff from Western-based properties, though. Because that's definitely something that came out of the anime/Japanese game fans.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, you see, like, Master Chief,
Okay.
Or Kratos, like, I'm sure there's, like, the Microsoft kind of properties, or the ones made by Naughty Dog, or things like that. That'll probably fine. But there's not. I mean, unless you consider Sonic like a Western property, which he kind of is.
Yeah. Okay. Like I generally haven't gone to many conventions, so I actually don't know.
Yeah.
So.
It's kind of interesting your point here because you're talking about it like from an adult's perspective, and to me Halloween is something that has died to me when I was a kid, so like I never think about it as an adult. But even as a kid, or even now, I would think like Halloween is interesting because it's really fun when you're a kid and your parents really encourage it and everybody's like on board. But then it goes through this like awkward period where it's just not fun anymore. But I think it has the potential to be fun again, but typically not till you're like settled in, you're married, you and your spouse get into it. Maybe you have kids. That's kind of what reinvigorates it. At least with my personality. But I do respect that there are a lot of people that seem to genuinely enjoy it as just like an adult, like entertainment for an evening. I think that's really cool. But usually I would say that base, and maybe I'm generalizing, but I would assume that base typically goes for more generic things like, like a doctor, as opposed to like a specific character. At least that's based on Facebook history. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, unless if your group of friends are a bunch of complete nerds, yeah, it's going to be more generic stuff, not anything like that's a specific video game character.
Right. So, like, I think Chuck had mentioned that, like, he and his wife, like, dress up as, like, or at least they look forward to seeing, like, Bowser and Mario type of costumes, and I think that's kind of what triggered all of this. So it's like, I respect the idea that people could do that together for fun. I'm just not at that place in my life. Maybe in a couple years, I'll be like, oh, man, now my whole tradition is I have to dress up like, Wario every year. I didn't realize, like, how much I look like Wario, and now I just have to embrace it. You know what I mean? Who knows?
This is actually a good point. I'm actually going to a Halloween party this year. Maybe I should actually pull out that Kingdom Hearts costume I have.
Yeah.
What? We just changed the world. All right.
Also, I would just like to close by saying that I think we need to see more like sexy video game character, like things you have like the sexy nurse or like the sexy cop or whatever. I need like sexy Donkey Kong, where you actually put more clothes on him, like put him in lingerie or something like that, take off the tie, or I want, I guess there's like, sexy Master Chief or something like that, where it's just like a banana hammock and the helmet,
So to top this all off, just to round it all out, what I think should happen is, Joseph, you have to go to your Halloween party dressed as sexy Bowsette.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot of work. Like the Kingdom Hearts costume I already have.
Yeah, but like you could be sexy Bowsette. Think about it.
Bowsette's always sexy.
There you go. All right. Well, that'll about do it for that one. So thank you very much to Chuck, and technically to Cox. Thank you very much, dude. But next time, please check your DMs. But anyway, so we will move on. The next subject here is from Spencer Puryear, and this one is going to be more of a. I'm going to be honest. This is more of a grounded type of discussion that I think that the three of us typically get into. He wanted to talk about there is probably a global recession coming up. It's going to affect different countries more extremely. I'm going to be honest, I think the US is going to get off kind of light by comparison. But as that's coming, how does that affect game collecting? You know, will that make prices higher? Will it make them cheaper? How will we personally react to it? What do you kind of expect?
I think it's an interesting question because during the time of the last recession, you know, that started late 2008, 2009, and kind of lasted for, you know, a good few years. You know, it didn't go away that quickly. I had really just started really collecting for video games. I had started, like, I gotten to the point where I was like, you know what, I'm not going to always sell off, you know, the old stuff to get the new stuff kind of mindset. So I was more just in that accumulating phase naturally, but I wasn't going out specifically for retro games and hunting that stuff. You know, I had, you know, the stuff that the limited things that I kept from childhood, but that was about it. You know, it wasn't until probably around like 2013, 2014 that I started picking up more of that stuff. So I don't really have a reference point, especially for retro games, and I think it's interesting because at the time of the last recession, retro games weren't as big as they are right now. They were still like very much niche, hobby for a select group of people. You know, those were the days where you could still go to a flea market and find a little Samson, you know, sitting on a table for $5. You can't do that now. Like, the prices are out there. Pandora has opened the box, you know, and prices now are insanely high for the most part still, post-COVID. And then also the hobby is bigger than others, than it was back during the recession. And I don't think people are going to be leaving the hobby in that big droves. I find this an interesting question, though, because specifically, like, I've started paring down my collection. Just because, you know, out of financial necessity, you know, I have to pay off some stuff, and, like, that's one of my biggest financial assets is my collection. So but instead of, like, getting out of the hobby, I've pivoted, and I've started accumulating things like EverDrives and ODEs. Like, I just told Adam after his video, I just purchased a satiator for my Sega Saturn. I just purchased a Atari Jaguar game drive for the Jaguar, so I can still enjoy the consoles and still enjoy the games and enjoy even more of those games. But at the same time, it allows me to purge some of the higher end games in my collection to kind of get more square financially, and that's what I could see happening to other collectors is, you know what, I don't need the bulk. I don't need the the shelves and shelves worth of stuff. Let me sell a lot of it, but keep kind of my core favorites and, you know, my core games. And then maybe pivot to something like an EverDrive. Or, alluding to our last subject with Abdullah, emulation. You know, it's a dirty word, but emulation's getting better and better, especially for some of these oddball consoles like the Jaguar or the Saturn. So that's what I could see. I could see prices continuing to plane down, which they have been, you know, with some exceptions like the 3DS and the Wii U, which has kind of started to go up a lot more lately because of the shop closures. Retro game prices have kind of plateaued. They're not continuously rising anymore. And in some cases, they've started to settle back down a little bit. But I don't see them settling down past pre-COVID levels unless there is a recession that's going to influence those prices and, you know, more mass sell-offs of collections.
Can we operate with the assumption there will, in fact, be a recession? Because that's essentially the hypothetical.
Yeah, I think that's the hypothetical. Yeah.
Yeah, not to get too political about it, but yeah, unless if things changed in how the government's responding to everything, yeah, recession's happening for sure. at least.
Well, again, not to get too political, because we're not trying to do that. I will say this. Nothing the U.S. can do is going to stop a global recession. That'll happen. The difference is how well the U.S. will weather it. Personally, I think we'll be much better off than other countries. But this has to do with a lot of external factors. Let's just say certain global conflicts, certain supply shortages, etc. There's only so much the U.S. can do to shield itself. But at least some of those issues don't affect us because we're self-sufficient on energy, we're self-sufficient on food, etc. So we'll be okay. It'll be an awkward few years, but that's a different discussion entirely. Regardless, I do agree and operate with the assumption there will be some recession of some kind in the United States. And with that understanding in the context of video game collection, how does that affect it? Rob made a very good point about in the previous recession, like how everything was cheap. Personally speaking, the recession of 2008 is what allowed me to complete the Dreamcast collection. Back then, there was a time right before it where that stuff was hard to find, but it wasn't super expensive, but you couldn't find it too much. The 2008 recession made people purge stuff because they couldn't afford it anymore. That's how I was able to end up finding a lot of these games. That's how I got my Dreamcast kiosk. That's how I got my Divers 2000 Dreamcast, etc. Is on the sad reality of a recession is people get kind of desperate and they start getting rid of stuff. And Rob alluded to that as well when he's saying I'm not desperate or anything, but like I'm pivoting. I need to pay bills. This is an asset, etc. I can only guess, because that's all any of us here can do, because none of us are economists, and I'll keep it real with you. Economists guess everything, too, based on trends. So that's all we're really doing here. But if we're just operating with the assumption that a recession will come. If it does, traditionally what happens is people start making their wallets tighter, and they start purging things. So if you have any disposable income for things like video games, my guess is the prices are going to start collapsing for a few different factors. Recession being one of them. The second is always something that's more common with video game trends, which is, as Rob and I have said many times in the past, video games become worthless when they're old, as in they're no longer the most recent thing. Their value falls off. The console that comes after them, launches. Like right now, at the time we record this, 360 and PS3 stuff is worthless. PS4 and Xbox One stuff is mostly worthless, etc. But eventually, what happens is the generation that had those as kids, they turn into adults in their 20s. They start having some money, and one of the things they do is buy back their childhood. Hence, the prices on those go back up, which is why everything from like N64 and Dreamcast and like late 5th gen, early 6th gen stuff is all kind of worth money right now. But then eventually it falls off again, because this inevitably happens where that generation's like, well, now I want to buy a house, now I got to have kids, etc. I don't have money and space for all this stuff. Let me get rid of it again. This always happens in cycles. I just think that the recession is probably going to overlap with that same next collapse that always happens in this. I think, and especially because, as Rob pointed out, we had the pandemic, which kind of artificially inflated prices for everybody for a lot of different X factors that we're not going to go into. I do personally think there will be some sort of retro collapse, but given what might be going on in the world, video games may not be everybody's priority. But that said, I do think they'll end up being a lot cheaper relatively soon. With certain exceptions. Of course, there's always going to be exceptions. But Rob creates a very good point, which is a lot of the stuff, when you get to a certain age, with the tech we have now, you're going to be completely content by having a satiator. You're going to be completely content by having the game drive, for example, for the Jaguar, and that'll be fine. The question before us eventually becomes, how many people are there left who care enough to have these super collections? Because one thing you said, Rob, that I actually do disagree with you on is you're saying you didn't really see the hobby getting any smaller. I don't agree with that, because I can't tell you how many of these retro game conventions I've been to where there's like these veterans of it that are just stunned why so many people are suddenly into this, but the people who are suddenly getting into it aren't there for any reason other than like, oh, this is cool, this is neat, this is weird. Not that they grew up with it, not that they have any great passion for it. It's more like it's something to do. And that crowd also is buying stuff that they'll probably get rid of too. So I don't know, man. I see a collapse in value coming through a lot of external factors. So if you have stuff and you want to make money off of it, I would say you should have done that last year, but you could also do it now. But if you're looking to buy more things and collect more stuff, your time is coming. That's my take on it.
Just to respond quickly to one point that you made, what I'm not like saying necessarily about the group of retro gamers shrinking is, yes, I could see the people that, especially in the past 3 years, like a little bit before and during COVID, that really bought into retro gaming, that became speculators of sealed games, that jumped in because they had more time and disposable money during COVID. Those will fall off. But I think geek culture in the past 5, 6, 7 years has become far more ubiquitous within world culture. It's now cool to be, into, comic books because of the MCU. It's cool to like Star Wars now. It's cool to like video games now. There are, the amount and proliferation of YouTube channels like dedicated to retro games is indicative of this, of a rise in interest in the hobby. I think it's more specifically that people are coming out of the shadows more in those 5 to 7 years range. It's the more recent additions, the people that kind of jumped in on the bandwagon later that are going to fall by the wayside. But I don't see, unless it's the truly older generation of collectors, not saying him specifically, but somebody like John Hancock's age, who, has been in game collecting for far longer than some of us. But that age might fall by the wayside a little bit. Or the people that joined in the past 2 or 3 years. But I don't see the entire hobby of retro gaming collecting collapsing just by, the influx of people all leaving at the same time.
I'm not saying, first of all, I think that's fair, but the last part of that, where you said the hobby I'm not saying that the hobby is going to collapse. Just the value of things is likely to go down significantly for a bunch of external reasons. Personally, I'll still be collecting a bunch of stuff, and I know a bunch of people that still will. I'm just saying there's going to be less competition, and there's going to be more supply. That's all.
Yeah, mine, my collecting is going to entirely depend on how bad this recession is and how my current employer reacts to it. Because I'm a software engineer, but I'm also a contractor there. So if they decide that they need to cut people, I'm one of the first to go. So that might make me have to stop collecting or sell off my stuff. But at this point, I'm not super worried about it because worrying about it's just going to make things going to just stress me out. And honestly, I have enough money saved up that if I'm gone, I have a buffer that if something happens, I could probably try to figure something out. But it's going to depend on how many people who are collecting lose their jobs, or how many people who are collecting are in lower income brackets, based on what actually happens to the value of stuff if people start selling stuff en masse.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So,
basically, I know personally, with me, I don't plan on, selling most of any of my stuff as long as, things are still going good for me personally. But I have a bunch of stuff that, if I had to, I would
go ahead and sell it, pretty
quickly. And I have 2 retro game stores still open in my area that I can get to sell them there instead of trying to do it off eBay, depending on what I can do. So,
yeah, And that's kind of where I'm at too. Is like I'm not going to sell everything. Like I'm not getting out of the hobby. I just see myself becoming far more refined in what I'm choosing to invest my money in. And instead of just buying, stuff for every console, like maybe if I sell off, some of my higher end Saturn stuff, like Burning Rangers and Magic Knight Ray Earth or something like that. See if I decide to sell that stuff off now, while it's still near the peak of its value. I wouldn't necessarily rule out me rebuying that stuff in a few years if there is a recession and my finances are stable enough, because I got into a lot of this when prices were still reasonable, and I went to thrift stores and garage sales and Craigslist and things that we don't really have anymore as avenues to get games cheaply anymore. It's not a thing anymore. Everybody knows the value of these things. Mm-hmm. So in a recession, if people are purging, there's people that joined in the past, 2-3 years are getting rid of some of this stuff, and the value is declining. Like I could see myself reinvesting in some of that stuff because I'm like, okay, well, I enjoyed it. I sold it at peak of its value. And, I got where I needed to be financially, and now I can reapproach rebuying some of the stuff at more reasonable prices again. So,
okay, that's a fair take. Personally, I haven't really ever considered selling much, if anything, in my collection. But who knows what if this recession gets really bad, maybe we have to. I'm in a different place in my life than I was in 2008, so who knows? Yeah. But I currently, all I can say is at this point in time, I have no intention of doing anything like that. I mean, dude, I just came back from Portugal, and I came back with more of those Phoenix PS2 games. Like, so, I still like to buy the trash.
Yeah, and that's the thing, too. It's like, if it wasn't for channels like yours that have introduced things like ODEs to me, which are a fairly new, invention in terms of retro gaming that allow you to emulate or boot ROMs onto disc-based consoles. I probably wouldn't sell. I'd be very much more hesitant to sell off, especially the disc-based stuff, because I wouldn't have an option to play those games otherwise. But with the advent of something like a Satiator or ODEs for the Dreamcast or whatever disk system you've got, or EverDrives that can play everything and more, I wouldn't be so quick to sell off some of the excess, because I'd want to hang on to it. But something like that allows true, when I say true, it's fucking subjective, but it's like what I would say real hardcore collectors that love the history and the hardware of games, not just the games themselves, to be able to keep something like a Sega Saturn, but not have a large collection of games kind of hanging over them financially. A Satiator allows you to not even have to mod your system. Just plug that thing in and load up the games, and you're good. So I think that's a great thing that's going to help people like me stay stay invested in the hobby.
Yeah.
All right. Sure. Anything else anybody wants to say about this?
No, I'm good.
I think we covered everything, honestly.
All right. Well, then that's the end of this particular subject. So thank you very much to Spencer for picking that. And Joseph, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we're back. What up, everybody? Keith has joined us. How you doing, Keith?
I'm doing quite well, sir. Doing quite well. Thank you very much.
Oh, of course. And so we'll just get right into it. So you like to talk movies. We like to talk movies. But there wasn't really like any big movie lately that was really worth talking about. So you actually had the idea, and I'll just let you pitch your own idea. Go for it, man.
Yeah, so I had the idea, this was coming to me the other day when I was watching a movie, is that a lot of times when you're watching a movie, a couple different things can come up when you're watching movies. You can think to yourself, why did I watch this movie in the first place? And for a lot of us, it's because someone recommended it, someone said it was good. But sometimes there's movies that you watch that you didn't want to watch at all. Nobody wanted to watch it at all. For some reason, you just ended up watching it. And you ended up loving it. I want to talk about movies that you never really thought you'd ever watch, never see at all, and yet, or even sound remotely interesting to you at all, but they turned out really great. And also, on the opposite side, we're going to be talking about movies that you, would consider, I guess, a bad movie or a horrible movie or a piece of crap, as it were, but you love it nonetheless. So those are the movie topics we're kind of be going over today.
Okay. All right. I will go first if everybody's okay with that. Okay. So I actually didn't know we were going to do that first part, but that's all right. That's cool. I got one ready to go. It was, as you were describing it, I was like, I can think of exactly the movie I would do. So, basically, all right, I'm old now, right? Like, we're all old. So I don't actually get to watch as many movies as I used to, but like in college era and like right as I was starting YouTube, like in this like window around there, I used to be like, okay, I'm just going to watch like every big thing that comes out. Like, I don't care what it is. I'm going to sit down and do it. This was before streaming really took off, because that's completely an impossible task now. But at the time, you're renting something via Netflix disc rental. It was very feasible to have that kind of be a thing. And also the the internet was your friend. Let's just put it that way. So there was movies I would just check out, even though I knew nothing about them, didn't know who was in them, didn't know the plots. I was just like, whatever, there's this movie, I'm going to watch it. And you come across a lot of garbage, and you come across a lot of things you've heard of that you were excited about for one reason or another, as you described. It's kind of rare to find a movie where you knew absolutely nothing about it. You had no idea why you were watching it other than what I just described as just no particular real reason. You just do it. And you end up loving it. And it's funny because I one sprang to my mind as you were talking, and so much so that I actually recently bought the Blu-ray of it. Have you ever seen or heard of a movie called Perfume, like Story of a Serial Killer?
Absolutely. No. I have seen it. It is very, very psychological, the best way to put it. And very gross, too. Yes,
it is a very gross, very French movie. That's the only way I can really put that. Even though it's not actually French. I mean, it takes place in France, but so I had no idea what this movie was. And based solely on the name, I just assumed this was maybe a chick flick. I had no idea what I was about to watch. And then this movie starts off and it's like the Middle Ages. So I don't know exactly, maybe like the 1400s, 1500s, and like disgusting, Paris at the time where everything's just like rats running around the street. You don't know what I'm talking about. Like that era of an environment. And it's got the narrator who is the old man in Hellboy. I'm like, all right, we're off to a weird start here. Let's see how this goes. And as it continues, you realize, like, man, Dustin Hoffman's in this movie. The late Alan Rickman is in this movie. This is insane. And you're just not really sure like where it's going, because it's about this baby is born and his mother is immediately killed, and you're like, wow, this is strange. And this kid just like abused and is like sent from like foster home to foster home, and nobody wants to take responsibility for him. And it's ultimately the plot ends up being that this guy was born with this ridiculous sense of smell, like on like an X-Men like level. Like no other human being has ever been able to have the way this guy can smell. But so he's just so profoundly struck by different odors that exist in the world, and he's just fascinated by them, like well beyond what we would. You smell a cup of coffee, it smells good, whatever. This guy would like almost orgasm at the concept of a new smell like that. So much so that, I mean, really jumping ahead here, but he ultimately becomes like a serial killer because he can smell the human soul, and he's trying to create like the ultimate perfume derived out of the beauty of women's souls. And like it's unclear as to what will happen when he can do this, if he even can do this. I won't continue on, explaining exactly what happens with that, but it's like a really weird, really messed up movie that I really just like, wow, I had no idea what I was about to see, and that movie was awesome. So that would be my answer for that. And then the one I would say as like the ultimate guilty pleasure movie, where it is, I mean, here we got to be very clear. I want to define a few things. You can enjoy a movie for any number of reasons, but there's a certain agreement in society of what is a good versus what is a bad movie. I would argue the simplest definition of that is a good movie, like a truly good movie, is something that we would see get referenced at the Oscars and people wouldn't laugh at that notion. Whereas a very genuinely bad movie is something that would show up at the Razzies and none of us would be angry about it. Does that make sense? Like, no one got upset that Catwoman didn't win an Oscar, but no one was surprised when it showed up at the Razzies, right? And obviously there's, all sorts of things in between. And like I said, you can like a movie for any number of reasons, but chances are, if you are sophisticated enough in film, you understand that you'd like a movie sometimes not because it's good, but because of in the ways that it fails, and you find those fails entertaining. Kind of like watching a car accident, essentially. So now the most famous bad movie that everyone loves, of course, is The Room, but I'm not going to refer to that just because that's like the Citizen Kane answer. So the one that always comes to my mind right after it, and I think I've actually talked about it in this podcast before, is Uwe Boll's House of the Dead, which that is one of like the worst, like in every sense of the word. That is a terrible movie. Like, it's awful. Like, it's hilariously bad. And yeah, the fact that you both reacted like that says everything you need to know. But I don't even like, how do you explain that movie? You have to watch it. You kind of have to watch it at a certain age and understand you're going to see some serious trash. I remember the first time watching it was about when it came out. So 2003, I was still in high school. And so your goals, your interests are a little different at the time. But I was like, okay, this is the only movie ever at that point in time that Sega had anything to do with. Let's see what this is. Or, well, okay, rephrase. Anything that was based on a Sega IP. And you're like, okay, what is this movie? And you're like, it starts off with like cutscene footage from the Saturn game. I'm like, this is not a good place to start. I was kind of okay with it when it was like part of the credits, because I thought, okay, maybe it's being some sort of stylistic thing. By the way, this is before Uwe Boll was nearly as infamous as he is now. He was not very well known when this movie actually came out. I just want that on record. But so I'm watching this movie and you're like, okay, but then those animated scenes from the game are used as actual cut scenes throughout the movie. And I was like, that's really weird. But all right, so the movie starts off with the protagonist basically already telling everybody how the movie ends. Like, all these characters are dead. You're like, okay. That's a weird way to start your slasher, is by letting us know which characters aren't going to make it. All right, fine. Then I kind of got hooked on this movie every once in a while, because I saw this movie like a stock market that's going out of control. Like, it would kind of ramp up and then all of a sudden there'd be this crash and you'd be like, all right, I'm out. And then all of a sudden it would ramp back up again for like no reason. And so as we're watching this first scene, I'm thinking, this is awful. This is just like the acting is terrible. They're ruining their own plot line. I don't know. Like, they can't seem to focus on one character. I'm like almost ready to tune out of this. And then all of a sudden the guy from Air Force One shows up. Like, the guy who was like the main villain in Air Force One, the guy, General Radek, the guy they're trying to free. He's like one of the main actors in the movie. I'm like, all right, I want to see something else where General Radek was like the lead of the movie. Then all of a sudden Clint Howard shows up. I'm like, oh crap, look, it's Ron Howard's weird brother. They're in this movie? All right, let's watch this for a second. And then it goes back down again when they bring in this, like, I think there was a cop named Casper, this actress who was the worst actress I have ever seen in any film ever. And that says a lot. She was so bad that when they made a made-for-TV sequel of this movie, which, yes, that exists, by the way, She was the only cast member willing to come back. Even Uwe Boll wouldn't do the sequel. That tells you something. Now, so as her performance is going down, like, wow, this is just garbage. This is an awful, what am I doing? And the movie, then they like end up at this weird island and there's a whole bunch of people like partying. And then the only reference to Sega ever is there. Is this big banner that says Sega. And I'm like, really? That means somebody from Sega at the time was on set and went, yep, that's good. This makes sense. I agree with this plan. That happened. You know it did. It had to. And so the movie's starting to tank down again. And all of a sudden, Erica Durance shows up. Erica Durance is best known as Lois Lane on Smallville. And all of a sudden, she's in this movie. And I'm like, what the? Okay, all right, I'm paying more attention. And it just kept going like that, where all of a sudden you're out. And then all of a sudden, like, Erica Durance is naked. And you're like, oh my God, that actress revealed herself to the world for this movie? Wow. And then, you know, it's just like all over the place, man. It's like then there's action scenes that are like fun because they're terrible, and then there's just massive continuity errors, there's terrible performances, and there's just characters that you cannot believe are doing the things they're doing, followed up by like the dumbest plot ever. And I'm still not even really sure what happened. As far as I can tell, some point like 100 years ago, some Spanish guy, like from Spanish imperial times, which was more than 100 years ago, but they don't present it that way. He somehow got a ship over to basically what is Vancouver, and he was like, I'm going to make zombies, and he just like lives in a basement somewhere. And I don't even understand it to this day. It makes no sense. But yeah, that is my ultimate, like, all right, I'm going to put this on, and we're just going to laugh at this movie the entire time. I liked that so much. That movie, as far as I know, has never had a Blu-ray release outside of Canada, oddly enough. So guess where I bought a Blu-ray of it? Oh yes, I picked it up. I picked it up in Canada. Exactly. So that would be, and I'm not going to sit here and recommend this movie to anybody. You have to know what you're getting into. It is an Uwe Boll diarrhea film, but I think it's the only Uwe Boll movie where I actually like enjoyed it genuinely. Whereas every other one of his is like it's like boring, or like you just tune out. And you're like, you get too annoyed by what you're seeing. But I will say this: if you ever for some reason do want to go down the rabbit hole that is Uwe Boll movies, watch them with commentary. It's way more interesting than the actual movies. I'll just give you a couple of examples. He made a movie, Alone in the Dark. You guys remember the video game franchise, Alone in the Dark?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he made a movie of that, and the only part I remember really sticking out about that movie is that in the commentary at one point, he talks about Tara Reid, who he made, Tara Reid from American Pie, who he cast as like the brilliant scientist that's going to save everybody. Great choice. He casts her, and then he's talking about her in the commentary, and he basically says, like, she came to set, and she was a complete slut. She was sleeping with everybody, and she offered her body to him, and he's like, no, I'm a professional. I will not do that. I care only about the movies. I don't care about you, Tara Reid. You're a whore. Like, this is the stuff he's saying in the commentary track, which I still find hilarious. And then I think it was that one, Blood Rain, the one where he put Kristanna Loken. Yeah. Same thing with that. In the commentary track, he's talking about, he mostly just makes fun of the actors, which somehow he gets like these really big end actors. It's mostly through a German tax credit exploitation thing, that German and Canadian tax exploitation thing. But anyway, so he's got Michael Madsen on there. Michael Madsen from, he does a bunch of, I know him best from Free Willy, but obviously he prefers to be remembered for like Quentin Tarantino stuff. But anyway, he's talking about him, and he's like, Michael Madsen is such an unprofessional actor. Every single day, every single scene you see Michael Madsen in, he is completely drunk. He is never sober. Only I care about the movies. I am the only professional, blah, blah, blah. It's just funny because he thinks his movies are like genuine masterpieces of art. There you go. Anyway, that's my answer to your two questions.
All right. That's all good. I'm definitely down to go next. I must say about House of the Dead, though, I was actually in love with zombie movies at the time, so I was just trying to find zombie movies at like Blockbuster at the time, and that one just that was one of those ones where I didn't plan to watch it, and I don't plan to watch it again. But yeah, it's a great movie, great movie. But when it comes to my particular movies that kind of surprised me or shocked me when I first watched it, I'm bringing up Pee-wee's Big Adventure, mainly because I decided to watch this movie one time. I have no idea why I decided to watch it. I never really had much experience with Pee-wee's Playhouse. I kind of remembered it from when I was a kid. But Pee-wee's Playhouse was kind of wacky and weird and not exactly my style at the time. And I was like, oh, what's a movie going to be like this? And then I turn on the movie, and holy shit. Yeah? Okay. Oh shit. Someone stole his bike? Oh, damn. Really? Oh, no. Oh, really? Oh, you mean this guy? Oh, shit. This happening? Oh, shit. This happening? I just couldn't believe it. It was a great example of how a road trip movie should be done, in my opinion. And I really, really enjoyed a lot of the aspects of it and didn't even give a shit that was fucking Pee Wee Herman. I didn't give a shit about all the funny little jokes or the ha-has and stuff like that. I just really enjoyed the fact of the adventure, the story, the adventure of it and all, and the almost innocence that Pee Wee has when it comes to a lot of situations and things like that. So Pee Wee's Big Adventure is one of the main movies I have for that category. But I do also have a second one as well, which is one most people actually know a lot about, and that's Pirates of the Caribbean. You know, I actually never thought a movie based off a Disney ride would be even remotely entertaining, but I am entertaining the hell out of the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie. I think it's entertaining as shit, you know?
I would respond to that by saying yes, but it's also the only time they ever pulled that rabbit out of that hat. So, like The Haunted Mansion, terrible. All the other Pirates of the Caribbean sequels, terrible. Tower of Terror, terrible. But the one they got it right that one time.
What's funny enough is like I started out never thinking a ride could be based off something, and then Disney actually had to prove to me that they could do it wrong. I was like, Disney, you know what? You did it. And they were like, no, hold my beer. I'll show you how to make a fucking terrible movie with fucking ride. I'll show you. The Haunted Mansion. Yeah, it was awful. Now to the kind of the second part of my thing, which is like the guilty pleasure movies. Surprisingly enough, they're kind of tied to one of my favorite properties of all time, which is actually the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And I enjoy the shit out of their theatrical release movies, which is Power Rangers the movie, and also Power Rangers, Turbo, a Power Rangers movie. And I really, really enjoy the hell out of the Power Rangers movies. The very first one has almost no continuity at all. It's almost taken out and done completely on its own. It's the very first time they were using their actors that they had to replace the original 3 actors from the show with. It starts off with them skydiving out of a plane. These are supposed to be high school students, by the way, doing this for a charity function. Skydiving out of a plane with none other than the White Ranger pulling off an extreme, what was called, I guess, skyboarding at the time. So he's riding on the skyboard down the fucking... So they're doing all these formations and stuff. They're all in their colors, of course. And, of course, they're not the Power Rangers. You know, they just like to wear the same colors. And they're doing all this thing. And the first Power Ranger movie, just called Power Rangers the movie, it has nothing to do with the actual show, really. It's on its own, and it's amazingly entertaining and fun, and I enjoy the shit out of that movie. And when it comes to the second one, Turbo, they pretty much didn't really try with Turbo. With Turbo, they pretty much just made a very long episode of the TV show, threw in a kid as the new Power Ranger, hope to God that it would bring in kids to the show, and then slowly and surely killed the shit out of Power Rangers as I knew it. But honestly, I enjoy watching Power Rangers Turbo. I have no idea why. It's fun. It's enjoyable. They bring back a couple of the old actors. Jason from the original, and also Kimberly from the original as well. I mean, really fun to watch. The villain, stupid, crappy lines, got stupid-ass henchmen she's smacking around all the time. Hilarious. I absolutely love it. And you know what? I know they're terrible movies by all aspect of movie. If you put it in scope, story, presentation, lighting, direction, acting, pretty much every category, they're shitty, terrible movies, but I love them. And that's the whole point of this, folks. Movies you'll love.
I unironically love the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie. Like I like this. Honestly, dude, here's the thing. You and I could do an entire podcast of me talking about Power Rangers. So I will not do that here, but just know that I am completely on board with the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers film. He's right. It's not canon, which is hilarious. Like, I know way too much about that movie. Like, I've watched it with commentary. I've watched all that stuff. Like, I've watched a lot of the research things. Yeah, like, trust me, I'm all over that. Like, it's one of the first films ever with CGI characters. Hence the Zords look so terrible at the end. I saw that movie in theaters. Like, I'm on your side there. Turbo I wasn't a fan of for different reasons, but it has its moments. And Power Rangers 2017 was a weird experience, but anyway, so yeah, we won't continue on that. All I know is like, bruh, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie, hell yeah.
Oh yeah. And by the way, 2017 movie, I get zero enjoyment from. Zero. So I can't even watch it, even ironically.
I wouldn't say zero. I would just say it's Krispy Kreme the movie. Like that's more of what it is. But anyway, we won't. Rob, sorry, you're up.
All right. So I love guilty pleasure movies. Like, I was trying to think, like, narrow this down, and I had trouble. Like, I love schlocky, fucking terrible movies. They're, and I was thinking, like, I think one of the things I miss about, like, cable television, because I don't have cable anymore. I cut the cord when I bought a house. And especially, like, early cable television, like 90s and 2000s, is watching stuff that you would never watch otherwise. You've got, 40 channels, and you're flipping around, and sometimes you just find something interesting, and you're like, well, it's either this or the news or the weather channel, and you watch it, and you end up, like, falling in love with it. I found so many just terrible movies that I fell in love with by just channel surfing. And I think that's like I think it's something that I miss a lot, is just discovering new things that way. Because you can't really get that on, Amazon or Netflix. It's all the algorithm. It'll show you stuff that you already kind of like. So when thinking of stuff like that, to answer your first question, that, like, I would have discovered, like, that's how I discovered stuff. I didn't really, read magazines or go on to too many, like, websites or whatever. So if I was going to find something that, I wouldn't have seen otherwise, it would have been on TV. So that's how I discovered, like, one of my all-time favorite movies, the movie Clue, starring Tim Curry and Michael McKean, and, like, Christopher Lloyd's in that movie. Adam, you've seen Clue, right?
Not since I was a kid, man.
Oh.
I barely remember it at all.
I'm sorry?
1 + 2 + 2 + 1.
Yes. Like, I highly recommend you watch this movie. It is one of the greatest comedy films ever made. It is so rip-roaringly hilarious. And it's kind of like, that Pirates of the Caribbean thing, where it has no right to be this good. It's based off of a fucking board game. And, like, just like, being based off of a theme park ride, what other board game movies are good?
Does Jumanji count?
No. Jumanji's a movie about a board game.
Fine.
But, like, Battleship, was the Rock in that movie? Yeah, it's shit like that.
Oh, that Liam Neeson was in that, wasn't he?
Oh, I don't even know. But
that sounds familiar.
I don't think Battleship is anybody's guilty pleasure movie. But Clue is absolutely one of mine. The cast is brilliant. The comedy is hilarious. I like how they do multiple endings. And yeah, it's just so much fun. And I would have never have seen that movie if it wasn't just channel surfing on TV, and it's like, okay, like, this looks okay, let me just sit down and watch this. So yeah, definitely Clue. And then like movies, like bad movies that I really love. I've got two. So one of them, since it's Halloween, October, spooky month, we have to do a scary movie. So I'm going to say my guilty pleasure horror movie is the movie Teeth. Have any of you guys seen Teeth?
Oh no,
I haven't. I have not seen it, but I know what you're talking about.
I'm sorry. I'm cringing a little bit as a man. Just if you know, you know.
So Teeth is a horror movie about this girl who has what they call vagina dentata, which is basically a toothy vagina. So
she's a Gilgamesh.
Yeah. So
I got that reference.
Yes, I did too.
South Park.
So the thing I love about this movie, and this goes for like lots of horror movies, I don't know how many Jurassic Park movies or Jaws movies have like happened, just because it's, don't go in the water and you're not going to get eaten by a shark. Don't go to the dinosaur island and you won't get eaten by dinosaurs. And yet every fucking movie, and over the course of the movie, they have to find excuses to go in the water and get eaten by a shark, or go to the island and get eaten by dinosaurs. That's the amazing thing about Teeth, is that it's about this girl who has vagina dentata, and it's like all you have to do is not have sex with this girl, and you won't get your dick bitten off. That's the way this movie is done. And it's just finding these hilarious ways of people having sex with this girl to like get them to get their dicks bitten off. And one of them is just amazing, where she has to go to the gynecologist because she's like, I don't know what's happening. And the gynecologist is like this really creepy, gross dude. And he's like, oh, I'll fix it. You girls don't know about your bodies. I know about your bodies. And he like, he sticks his hand up there and he gets caught. And it bites his fingers off, and he pulls his hand out, and he's like missing 4 fingers. And he's like, oh my god, vagina dentata! I fucking love that movie. It is so fucking funny. And it's just like a really good, just gory, like, horror movie. So if you haven't seen Teeth, I highly recommend you see Teeth. Okay, and then my second guilty pleasure movie is, so I was thinking really hard about this, like, what's movies that genuinely people don't like that I like? And my mind went to a subject that is often on my mind, Star Trek. And because I fucking love Star Trek. I'm a giant fucking nerd. I adore the franchise, and I find good things to like in even like the worst instances. I could still sit down and watch Final Frontier or, the motion picture, just because I will find some parts of it entertaining. But a movie that like people just genuinely don't like, that I'm like, I really do like this movie, is Star Trek Insurrection, which is one of the Next Generation films. It's not, with Captain Kirk, it's with Captain Picard. And I don't know why so many people hate this movie, because that movie is just fun. It's lighthearted. The stakes aren't massive. It isn't save the universe kind of stakes like so many other things. There's no time travel. There's no, there is like some space battles, but there's no like giant space battle. It reminds me so much of an episode of the Next Generation series, and that's why I like it. It's very much a true Star Trek story on the big screen. Yes, there are some elements of like, movie problems that Star Trek has, like turning Patrick Stewart into an action star. Like he does like do some fucking action heavy stuff, completely out of character. But everything else is like really fun and lighthearted, and the villain of the movie is F. Murray Abraham. Like,
yeah, dude, he killed Amadeus, man.
I'm like, who the fuck is gonna pick F. Murray Abraham to be your villain in a big budget Star Trek movie? I just love the balls of that, of the casting of that movie. Just like, yeah, let's just get this Oscar-winning amazing actor to be the villain in Star Trek Insurrection. And that's why I think that's why I like it. I like it just because it feels slightly lower stakes. It's the messaging and the story are very much on brand for Star Trek. It's not trying to be too much. It knows what it is, and it just kind of has fun with it. But too often, I feel it gets lumped in with the classic even-numbered Star Trek movies good, odd-numbered Star Trek movies bad trope. And I don't think it deserves that. I think it deserves like a little bit more respect than it gets.
Absolutely. I actually really, really enjoy Star Trek Insurrection as well. You hit almost every point I would hit about the movie as well. But I gotta say, I actually can justify what Captain Picard's doing in that movie because the planet kind of makes you young.
Yes, yeah. So
makes you do it. So they kind of justify. They even tried to write the reason why he was all actioned up, which I thought was funny.
Yeah,
I thought that was good.
And that's like some of the humor I was talking about. I like how like the planet's making them all like change. Like Worf is going through Klingon puberty, and like Riker shaves off his beard and falls in love with Troy again.
That's a big thing. Honestly, remember, for a lot of people don't even know, even to this day, he is married to Troy based off of that what happened in that movie.
Yeah. So, I like that, Captain Picard's, like, listening to, like, mambo music, like, it just, it's like, I just think it's really just fun, and, sometimes a movie doesn't need to be earth-shattering, like, stakes and action-oriented. It could just be, like, a fun little movie, and that's what I like about it.
Yeah, and that's kind of what this whole subject was about, man. To tell people that movies are subjective all in the end. We love to trash the bad, but in the end, you guys and we get to decide for ourselves what's good.
Oh, by the way,
what's enjoyable.
One last thing about Star Trek Insurrection. So, a fun fact: my father, who is he kind of works in the filming industry. He's a cameraman, so he does like a lot of events or something like that where he's around kind of notable people. And at one of these events, F. Murray Abraham was one of the guests, and my dad knew this in advance and actually brought in his kind of work bag our DVD copy of Star Trek Insurrection, and he got F. Murray Abraham to sign that copy. And I remember my dad was telling me, he's like, hands it to him, and he's like, oh my god, I was expecting this to be like another Blu-ray of Amadeus or something, but it's, I actually really enjoyed this movie, but nobody asks me about it.
I would have given him Last Action Hero, actually.
That's another great movie.
I love that movie. That's a good one for guilty pleasure, by the way.
That is a good guilty pleasure movie.
That is a fantastic. The rock music. The crazy, terrible lines. Oh, it's a great movie. Even the kid says it in the movie that it's that good.
Yeah.
I mean, the random actors they get in that movie. Oh, yeah. But anyways, I wanted to jump one more thing. Rob, do you have something to finish?
No. I was going to say you could say what you want.
I just wanted to jump back on that one thing you said about the what we lost with getting to click around TV. I swear to you, I probably would not have watched Rocky Horror Picture Show if that didn't happen. Because that happened to me. That's a huge one that happened to me.
Yeah, before The Room, that was the bad movie that everybody loved. It's still like fantastic. I love that movie. The music is amazing. It's funny. It's so bad in its production. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why, like, Clue kind of feels like a slight spiritual successor to Rocky Horror in that it's, some of the same, like, characters like Tim Curry's in both, and they both take place in a mansion in a storm, but there's no music. It's just more of, like, a murder mystery. And,
the Clue music, actually, they did a great job with the score of that movie.
Yes, they did. It is fun.
Very fitting.
One thing we should discuss at some point, not today, but maybe in the future, and talking about Star Trek made me think of it. Movies that on paper should be awful, but somehow turn out to be like a masterpiece. And the one that comes to mind is Star Trek 4. If you just talk to somebody who's never watched Star Trek and you explain to them the basic plot of that film, they're like, look, there's this ship from the future. It's got like, captains in space. It's like, it's like an organization. Anyway, the movie starts with these people from space. They have to time travel around the sun because there's a big alien ship that shows up that's screaming at them and
shaped like a dildo,
and they don't know what it is, and then they find out that maybe a whale can talk to it, but there's no whales, so they're in the past and they get some whales, and like everything about it, if you were to explain it, is just like, this sounds like the worst thing I've ever seen. Yet that movie might be a 10. Like, that movie is so good that it's insane.
Here's my challenge to you guys. I think maybe we can do this next month, right? So
yeah, good.
So don't commit us to anything.
Well, you could edit this out if anything.
I'm not editing it out. I'm just saying, audience, if this doesn't happen, it's Rob's fault. That's all.
It's Adam's fault because he decides.
It's my.
Okay, so
it's actually Keith's decision. It's Keith's decision, not ours. Go ahead.
So here's the challenge I pose to you. Okay, over the course of the next month, you need to come up with a movie like Star Trek 4, right? And you need to pitch this movie to us as if we were studio executives, and you can't let any fucking like actual plot details, like character names or something,
like
go.
Password.
And we have to guess what movie you're pitching, and like, this movie sounds fucking terrible. What is it?
So basically, describe something badly.
Describe something badly that is a great movie that has no right to be that good.
All right. Describe something badly in earnest.
Yes.
Okay.
Like, you are trying to get this movie sold. You need to get this movie sold to make that rent. You know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about, you're like Ron Howard trying to pitch at that Simpsons episode.
It's about a pie. I think that's what he says at the end.
I don't know, but his friend is a talking pie. Here you go, Ron Howard. You've done it again.
These happy days aren't yours and mine. At least we all get the reference.
That's right.
All right, we'll see if that happens. Maybe we'll all forget. Who knows?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that'll do it then. Unless you have anything else you guys want to say.
No,
all right. All right, well, Keith, thank you very much for that subject, and of course for joining us. Big thank you to Joseph, of course, for joining us and being around. Shout outs to Chuck Shaw and Cox and Spencer Puryear, Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, Tim Inmer, Trey Wagner, and of course Abdullah for being around earlier as well. His contribution, always appreciated. Glad he's feeling better. So thank you guys. Oh, and Rob, I guess you're fine. Thank you very much to everybody for listening or watching. Please, as always, like, comment, subscribe down below. We appreciate the support. Check out all the social media stuff: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, especially Patreon, because again, you can either you can get shout outs, you can get early access to this and other videos, you can pick subjects, and you can even potentially be on the podcast. So thank you very much, and we'll see you all later.